While she was enjoying herself at an amusement park, she suddenly noticed a group of strangely dressed people following her. As they drew closer, Sharon panicked and rushed into a nearby carousel to hide. But to her horror, more and more footsteps began closing in on the carousel. Unable to resist, she cautiously peeked out, only to hear a terrifying roar right behind her. A pyramid-head monster stood behind her, violently spinning the carousel. The horses twisted and warped into two people hanging in chains, their piercing screams making Sharon tremble in fear. Amid the chaos, a pale girl appeared, repeatedly warning Sharon not to go to Silent Hill. A ring of flames suddenly ignited around the carousel, engulfing it as the fire rapidly spread. Terrified, Sharon screamed, only to realize it had all been a nightmare. Luckily, her father Harry rushed in and held her, helping her slowly calm down. But in the blink of an eye, a chainsaw suddenly pierced through Harry's body. With a terrified scream, Sharon jolted awake again, this time truly back in the real world. Over the years, every time she and Harry moved, the same nightmare would come back to haunt her almost immediately. She didn't understand why she kept dreaming of those figures and Silent Hill, or why she and Harry had to keep changing their names, but whenever she pressed Harry for answers, he would remain silent. After breakfast, Sharon headed to school, while Harry stared at a family photo, lost in thought. Years ago, Sharon and Harry's wife, Rose, were trapped in Silent Hill. After a desperate search, Rose found half of a seal and used it to send Sharon out of Silent Hill's world, but she was left behind forever, repeatedly urging him to protect Sharon from the cult. To protect her, he lied, telling her she had survived a car accident that took her mother's life. On her way to school, Sharon encountered a strange man who kept asking for her name. Uneasy, she pulled away and hurried off to school. Even at school, the nightmare and the strange man kept haunting her mind. Before she could make sense of it all, the crowded hallway suddenly emptied, leaving her completely alone. Everything was suddenly plunged into darkness, and when the lights flickered back on, the hallway had turned into a decaying corridor. In the distance, a creature with its hands tightly wrapped in skin slowly approached her. Just as it closed in, a hand suddenly pulled her back to reality. It was her classmate Vincent. She quickly thanked Vincent and left, but the unease inside her only grew stronger. And sure enough, the moment she stepped outside, the strange man caught up with her again. Terrified, Sharon quickly called Harry for help, and they agreed to meet at a mall near the school. Sharon soon arrived at the meeting spot, but Harry was nowhere to be seen, and the surroundings began to distort again. The once bright and lively mall turned dark and unsettling in an instant. As the strange man caught up to her again, panicking, she turned and ran, hiding in the restaurant kitchen. Desperate, she tried calling Harry again, but there was no answer. Just then, the man followed her in, and Sharon quickly grabbed a metal pipe to defend herself. But the man suddenly stopped, claiming he was a private investigator who had been hired years ago to track her down. Sharon assumed it was about the incident years ago, when Harry killed someone in self-defense, but the investigator revealed it was actually a cult hunting her. Her lost memories weren't from a car accident. She had been trapped in Silent Hill, and it was her mother who rescued her. Now the cult had set their sights on her again. But before the investigator could finish explaining, a monster suddenly attacked him. Sharon quickly pulled him into an elevator and hit the controls to start it. She pressed him for answers, but suddenly the doors were pried open, and the creature slashed through the elevator gate with 2 strikes. At the last second, the elevator jolted violently and came to a stop, and the monster disappeared with it. Relieved, they prepared to leave. But just as Sharon stepped out, the creature suddenly reappeared and dragged the investigator away. Terrified, Sharon ran for her life, forcing her way through a corridor before finally escaping the basement. Outside, the area was already surrounded by police, and several officers were wheeling out the investigator's body. Worse still, they found a photo of Sharon on him, instantly making her the prime suspect in his death. At that moment, Vincent, who had been watching from the sidelines, came over and asked what had happened. Frightened, Sharon turned and left, and Vincent followed, offering to walk her home. But when they got home, Sharon discovered that Harry had suddenly disappeared. On the wall was a mysterious blood-red symbol, along with a warning telling her to go to Silent Hill. She suspected her father had been taken there, but she had no idea where Silent Hill actually was. As she struggled with what to do, she suddenly remembered the same symbol on a wooden box her father kept. Inside the box, they found countless notes about Silent Hill, along with the seal and a handgun. Before she could examine them, there was a knock at the door. The police had arrived, and she grabbed everything and fled with Vincent. On the way, she dug out a letter Harry had left behind, revealing he had anticipated all of this. 2 years ago, the man he killed wasn't a robber at all, but one of the cultists, and he warned Sharon never to go to Silent Hill, no matter what, and to protect herself. Through Harry's notes, she finally uncovered the full truth. In Silent Hill, a cult known as Valtiel secretly controlled the entire town. They had been waiting for a special child to be born, intending to sacrifice her to a dark god in order to create a new world. Eventually, they set their sights on a girl named Alessa, but the brutal ritual backfired, and the pain Alessa endured gradually drove her into darkness. She summoned countless dark creatures to unleash her revenge on the cult. with Pyramid Head acting as both her guardian and executioner. To spare a part of herself from the suffering, she extracted her remaining innocence and sent it out of Silent Hill in the form of Sharon. And Sharon was the only way to destroy Alessa. Once she entered Silent Hill, the cult would stop at nothing to capture her. As Sharon was still absorbing the truth, the two arrived at a motel near the town and decided to search for Harry the next morning. That night, Sharon dreamed of a young Alessa relentlessly slaughtering the cultists around her. The horrifying vision jolted her awake, and she turned to see Vincent staring at the seal in his hand with a worried expression. He begged her not to go to Silent Hill, insisting it was a trap, but Sharon refused, determined to find her father. As they argued, Vincent angrily revealed that he was from Silent Hill, and that the cult's leader Anne was his mother. He admitted that he had approached her only to bring her back, but had begun to change his mind after spending time with her. Sharon could hardly believe it, until Vincent revealed the cult's mark on his body, leaving her no choice but to accept the truth. The cult had already set a carefully laid trap for Sharon, and the only way to stop them was to unite the two halves of the seal. The other half was in the possession of his grandfather, Leonard, who was being held in the cult's prison. Before Vincent could finish, the room was plunged into darkness, and the walls began to rapidly decay. As Sharon drew closer to Silent Hill, Alessa sensed her presence, and the darkness began to spread rapidly. Suddenly, a monster snatched Vincent away and knocked Sharon unconscious. When she woke up, the air was thick with white fog, and black ash drifted down from the sky. She had entered Silent Hill's fog world, and without hesitation, she moved forward to find her father. After passing through a narrow passage, she was shocked to find the square filled with executed bodies. A warning siren suddenly blared, and the surrounding buildings rapidly decayed into ash, rising into the air. Realizing the monsters were coming, Sharon quickly hid inside a nearby house. After making her way through a heavily deteriorated hallway, she entered a room filled with mannequins. The room was filled with lifelike mannequins in all kinds of poses, and the unsettling feeling of being watched made Sharon uneasy. She quickly moved to an open space, only to witness something even more horrifying. A naked woman lay on a work table, and in an instant, an unseen force turned her into a lifeless mannequin. Before Sharon could recover, a woman wrapped in plastic weakly called out for help. Sharon rushed over and tried to tear the plastic away, but the commotion caught the monster's attention. A spider-like creature stitched together from countless mannequins crawled rapidly toward them. It lunged at a nearby mannequin and, with a quick twist, tore off its head and attached it to its own body. As the creature rapidly closed in, they ran for the emergency exit, but the door was locked tight. With no other choice, they desperately crawled toward a nearby air vent, struggling to reach it. Before they could make it, the creature slammed into a shelf, knocking it over as it charged straight at them. Luckily, the fallen shelf slowed it down just enough for Sharon to open the vent and crawl inside. The other woman wasn't so lucky. She was violently dragged away by the creature. Following the vent, Sharon stumbled into an asylum filled with the screams of executed cultists. Thinking Leonard might be held there, she forced herself to move forward despite her fear. After searching, she finally found Leonard in one of the rooms. After being kept in darkness for so long, he had gone blind, constantly muttering curses at the cultists. Unmoved, Sharon told him she was looking for her father and demanded to know where the other half of the seal was. Leonard insisted he needed to touch the seal before he could remember where the other half was. Though hesitant, Sharon handed it over while keeping her gun trained on him. Without hesitation, Leonard drove the seal into his own body, and its power instantly restored him. Realizing something was wrong, Sharon hastily pulled the trigger, but Leonard broke free of his chains, transforming into something far more terrifying. She stumbled back in fear, but he knocked her out with a single blow and carried her away. When she came to, she spotted the completed seal embedded in his chest, right where the gun had struck. Without hesitation, she reached in and tore it out with all her strength. Deprived of its power, Leonard crumbled into ash. As she carefully moved on, the noise drew the attention of the prisoners on both sides. They clawed wildly, trying to grab the seal, when suddenly, Pyramid Head slowly emerged in the distance. He swung his massive blade, slashing through the prisoners around him, while Sharon slipped into a narrow gap to hide. Only after he was gone did she dare to peek out again. Before she could leave, she saw two masked figures dragging Vincent, strapped to a hospital bed, into a room and locking him inside. Inside, the room was packed with motionless nurse creatures, each holding a sharp weapon. The sound of the door caught their attention, and they quickly charged at the masked figures with their weapons raised. One of them swung a stun baton wildly, trying to drive them back, but more nurses closed in. In the next instant, the nurses brought their weapons down in savage strikes. The other rushed in to help, but was overwhelmed and slowly beaten to death. Only when silence returned did the nurses freeze once again. Vincent carefully tried to free himself, but the moment he moved even slightly, the nurses stirred again. With them closing in right in front of him, he had no choice but to stop and await his fate. Just then, Sharon suddenly appeared beside him and quickly freed him, risking everything. The noise drew every nurse in the room, and they closed in on the two with blades raised. At the last second, Vincent suddenly flipped the bed to block their attack, and the two made their escape. Vincent then led Sharon to the amusement park where Harry was being held, only to find cultists wandering everywhere. To repay her, Vincent immediately chose to sacrifice himself and lure the cultists away. As she looked at the familiar park, the nightmare from before flooded back into Sharon's mind. Taking a deep breath, she forced down her fear and rushed straight toward the carousel. Just like in her dream, a ring of fire rose around her, and Alessa slowly appeared. She kept urging Sharon to abandon Harry, insisting he meant nothing to her. But Sharon firmly refused, and Alessa, enraged, grabbed her by the throat, trying to take back everything she had given her. Unafraid, Sharon stepped forward and embraced her, proving that the love she had known was far stronger than all that pain. In the end, in this clash between love and hatred, Alessa slowly turned to ash and faded away. Sharon then stepped into a nearby chapel, where she finally saw Harry and Anne. Anxiously, she asked how to free Harry, but Anne replied that Sharon had not only eliminated Alessa, but also completed the seal. Sharon tried to use this to bargain for Harry's release, but instead, Anne revealed he would be sacrificed to a new god. This new god would be reborn through Sharon, and only then could all the cultists be absolved and reborn. Anne then demanded the seal, and without hesitation, Sharon handed it to her. The moment Anne touched it, her twisted mind began to corrupt her body, triggering a horrific transformation. A grotesque creature covered in spinning blades was born, and it lunged at Sharon, slashing wildly in a frenzy. At the critical moment, Pyramid Head arrived just in time, blocking the attack and engaging the creature in a brutal fight. While they clashed, Sharon and Vincent rushed to Harry and freed him from his restraints. After a fierce struggle, Anne accidentally stabbed Pyramid Head, but it pulled the blade out and hurled her away despite the pain. Moments later, Anne charged back through the flames, but Pyramid Head swung its massive blade and finished her off. In the end, before the terrified eyes of the three, Pyramid Head let out a roar and walked away. With the cult destroyed, Alessa's nightmare finally came to an end, and the ash drifting through Silent Hill began to settle. As the three headed toward the exit, Harry suddenly stopped and said he wanted to stay behind. His wife Rose was still trapped here. He had fulfilled her wish, and now he wanted to remain by her side. In the end, Sharon said goodbye to her father, and they each went their separate ways. Darkness and hatred once turned Silent Hill into a living hell and drove Alessa completely into the abyss. But love and compassion redeemed those lost in the fog, finally bringing this long entangled fate to an end. Yet the legend of Silent Hill never truly ends. It still waits for the next soul consumed by obsession.